Just recording for our CE YouTube channel so that any STEM students who aren't here can benefit from Kevin's wisdom later. So my name is Shelby, and of course we've got Professor Herworth here as well from our AIMS STEM program. So thank you so much for being here. We've got great events coming up, so if you're not already part of our AIMS Engineering Research Lab Canvas shell, go ahead and shoot me a direct message. I'll add you to that. But you probably learned about this through that page, so we're welcome to have you here. And today we're doing a transfer workshop sponsored by the Transfer Center, of course, all about the intricacies of transfer when it comes to being a STEM major. So if you don't mind letting us know what your specific major is in the chat, I think that'll help out a lot. And while you're doing that, I'm going to introduce Dr. Meza, who is from our Transfer Center and also does a lot of great things on campus, our guided pathways coordinator, and just really makes the school more accessible for students and transfer pathways more easily to understand, and even the transition from college to career. So we're so excited to have you here. Looks like lots of engineering, computer science, aerospace, mechanical, perfect. And feel free to be interactive in terms of asking your questions. This is your chance to do so. If you don't feel comfortable since it's being recorded, you can always direct message it to one of us. But without further ado, I will hand it over to Dr. Meza.
Thank you, Shelby, for setting this up, and great to see Professor Herworth with us today too. And as we go through this, sometimes it's hard for me to follow the chat. So if you have anything funny to say, definitely say it audio so I can hear it, so we can all laugh. And then I think Shelby can moderate. If there's some questions, go ahead and let me know, Shelby, what they are. And for any of you students, feel free to interject anything that you want. You can unmute yourself and ask the questions. I kind of like it open. It kind of keeps me like on. So I've been doing this for a while now. I've been doing it for over 20 years. So it's, I can give you some perspective over time, and there's some general transfer guidance that relates to pretty much all majors, and there's some specific for the STEM major specifically for you all. So we'll cover that too. Most students at community colleges generally go to the school closest to them, proximity. So a lot of you are probably looking at Cal State LA, Northridge, Pomona, maybe UCLA and so forth. That's just generally, but other students are looking out of state, and I encourage you to do that. There's 49 other states, you know, you know, keep an open mind. You generally would, and I don't, it's hard to say with pandemic, obviously, what that looks like, and I don't want to jinx anything, but looks like things are coming around a little bit down the road. So being away from home might be interesting for you, and to explore maybe, you know, go to school in Boston or you know, back east. Let me get an idea as I adjust the presentation to the schools that you're thinking about. So go ahead and put in the chat any schools that you're thinking about transferring to. And that'll give me an idea what to talk about today. So UCs and Cal States, I see CSUN and Pomona, perfect. Yeah, that's a popular one there. UCLA, UC San Diego, the UCs, Long Beach. So far, the usual suspects. You know, usually the same hot programs that students like. Santa Barbara, some UCs. Okay. There's in-state tuition all the way. It's the way to go. So yeah, let's start with tuition. So let's because we want to be practical about this. And just so you know, I have like a formal slide thing I can do in a minute, but I'll throw you some information now, and I might repeat later on. But let's talk about financial aid a little bit. The tuition for the UCs and Cal States might be free. Actually, for a lot of you, it might be free if your family income is below 80,000. So for the UCs, it's called the Blue and Gold Scholarship. After we finish this presentation, you might want to look it up, the Blue and Gold Scholarship for the UCs. And there might be some slight provisions in it, but generally family income below 80,000, your tuition will be waived. UC tuition is roughly 14,000, 15,000 for tuition. And cost of living is 20-something thousand. That means your books, housing, things like that. So that'll be waived. So if you lived at home and got the Blue and Gold Scholarship, then your whole thing would be relatively free. The only challenge is that you're living at home, right? So when you live at home, that could be good. or it could be stifling your growth, right? Sometimes, and what I mean that in different ways is sometimes, particularly STEM, you need to focus if you're writing notes today, your two most precious resources as a student are your time and your energy. So your time and your energy are your two most precious resources. And ideally, if I was, well, I guess you guys think like this too, right? If you're programming a person, a robot person, I would say, here's success. What makes you a successful robot person, which if I had a kid, that's what they would be, but that's why I don't have kids, luckily, because I probably would mess them up. Anyway, so here's what the research shows on successful students. So successful college student lives on or near campus, ideally. So when you transfer, ideally you'll live maybe walking distance or maybe a short commute. Ideally, probably no more than 15 minutes, just real quick, because you're more likely to be involved on campus. You're more likely to participate, go to study groups, things like that. You're more likely to that study group is at like 3 o'clock, for example. If you commute, you want to go home and beat the traffic, right? So on your campus, try not to work more than about 15 hours a week. 12 to 15 hours is the sweet spot, and that includes your internship. A lot of you want to get internships while you're in community college or the four-year college, because your type of major, you go directly into the work field. A lot of times you don't, and I'm getting a master's or PhD because what you do is directly relatable and in the work field. And if you have a strong internship, that'll prepare you. And generally, a lot of companies hire out of that internship. So 12 to 15 hours a week of internship/work, live on or near campus and get involved. You want to obviously get involved in your particular field, but also some other leadership opportunities too, just for you to grow, right? And that's the successful package. At the same time, you are also increasing your competition by practicing your interviewing skills, resumes, and so forth. So definitely use a Glendale Career Center on how to conduct yourself in an interview, how to get your cover letter together, your resume, things like that. Because again, with your types of fields, you're going directly into the job market when you finish. So you're already working on polish. And I'm sure this organization helps you with that too, with it. The average debt for a California graduate is about $30,000, roughly 25 to 35,000. So when you graduate, wherever you go, on average, it'll be in that range. If you graduate with that, you're in the average. If you graduate below that, great, you save some money. If you owe more, that's still fine, because it depends on what you want to do. Generally, with your types of field, you make money right off the bat more than another type of major. So if you owe 40,000, 50,000, it's still kind of reasonable. Now, it's all subjective of what you're comfortable with. But if you get into a great program, you're really happy with it, 40, 50,000, it's not like crazy compared to 100, 120. But when you start to get into those decisions, we can talk over, I can give you my opinions, because it's kind of a value judgment. How much do you want to be in debt or not with what you want? I feel, in my opinion, a program that you love and you're 50,000, I still think it's reasonable. Sometimes you get into the 70,000 to the 100,000. That's where it gets like really tricky. You have to decide, right? But for most of you, the Cal States will probably be waived tuition, and the UCs. Tuition for Cal States, roughly 7,000, depends on what budgets happen. So 7,000 tuition for the Cal States, roughly 14,000 for the UCs, and then the rest is your cost of living. So that's that cost issue. And because you're a California resident, the Cal States and UCs are cheaper than if you went out of state. So that's your best value. So you want to keep those things in mind. I'm scrolling through the schools that you're listed here. Let's start also with Cal State Northridge, since that's a popular school. Cal State Northridge and Cal State Los Angeles are local area campuses, so they give preference to Glendale students. So you have to have at least 31 units at Glendale College or a school in the area. It's called Northridge's service area. So if you're in the Northridge service area, you'll get priority, which means that anywhere from a 2.0 to 2.7, depends on your program, you would be admitted. Where if you're an out of area student, you might need somewhere in the 3.4s, 3.5s, 3.6 on the GPA. What you want to do is you can Google search Cal State Northridge impacted majors. And when you pull that up, you'll see a list of about 10 or so majors that are called impacted at Northridge. And that'll tell you if there's something that you need to do extra at Northridge. I'm going to pull it up. I'm not sure if I'm going to share the screen, but I'm going to roll them off for you so you kind of know what they might be. These things change every once in a while, but they usually give us a heads up of what the programs to look at are. Now, your major is a difficult major. By all means, it's a really challenging major, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's hard to get into certain schools. So I want to say that again. Difficult major, and some schools are really difficult to get into and some are not. So just because you don't have the GPA for one doesn't mean you're isolated from the other one. So it's a school by school decision. I remember years ago, a certain campus, they had a really competitive major, and then it became easy to get into, but no one really figured that out. So for years, students were not applying when they could have had a 2.0 GPA and got admitted, right? So each year is different. I don't know. We're not exactly sure how COVID is affecting admissions trends right now. My feeling is that it might be a little bit more competitive in some ways and not as competitive in others, because certain students decided not to go to a four-year college and they decided to go to community college to work from home. And that we'll kind of see how it affects admissions for everybody. So for Northridge, none of your majors are what we call impacted. None of the, here's the impacted majors at Northridge, means they're harder to get into. Accounting, business, biology. So biology for some of you might be, I think this is more engineering group, but biology is cinema, communications, some health science major, kinesiology, psychology, and music. So if you're not any of those, then technically about a 2.0 GPA actually gets you competitive for a CSUN. Now, just because this is 2.0 doesn't mean it's a bad program. It's just that the state created something called an open access university. So that means that they want to make sure that everyone can go there and to increase the number of engineers or whatever major that might be. So don't let that fool you in terms of the competition level. So as it is right now, as long as you pass your classes, you have a really good chance. Now, ultimately for job hiring and stuff like that, your GPA, I would say, probably matters in your first job. And then after that, it probably doesn't matter as much, because in your first job, you're competing against other college graduates. And I would say it's a good GPA is probably 3.0 and above, but you could still get work below that. So don't misunderstand me, but you just want to get the best grades possible. So that's not a hindrance at all. Generally, your internship would override that. You know that the company knows your work, they know you're a problem solver, you're helping out. That can maybe balance out the GPA if you are below that 3.0 mark. And again, it's not a strict 3.0 in what they're looking for. Now for Northridge, for example, there's no specific thing that you would do outside of your Hear me out this whole thing though. Okay, so all it matters for most of these programs, to be real honest with you, is your grades. That's all. Nothing else matters for most of these programs. You take the right courses, you take the GPA, then you can get admitted. Now, don't say, okay, I don't have to do anything, I'm good. I'm like, because eventually you're going to have to get hired, right? You're going to have to do these extra things to make yourself more marketable and also feel confident in the workforce and everything. So separate what it takes to get admitted to these programs, which is just the GPA and courses, to what's going to make you more marketable in the field that you're pursuing there. The earlier you start, whatever it is that your technical skills are, the better, right? You develop these technical skills and you build, and then you become an expert. And before you know it, you're expert of 20 something years, you know, and you have it down pat, right? So, but you actually never do, because you're always improving, right? Particular technical skills always have to keep going there. So for CSUN, Google search impacted majors, CSUN, and you'll see specifically what their admissions criteria is, which you might know already, is your general education requirements, which is something called the IGETC or the CSU breadth. Some schools call something called STEM IGETC, where there's fewer classes for your general education requirements. They limit because you have so many courses for your major. When you meet with your counselor one-on-one or the transfer center, we'll pull up the STEM IGETC, which is a little bit more flexible. And then CSU breadth. CSU breadth is more flexible in general, but it does limit you to the Cal States only. So if you only want to go to Cal State, CSU breadth might be the better path. But if you're open to other opportunities, the IGETC covers you both. And again, you'll do the STEM IGETC. With your types of major, the priority is your major classes. You want to knock those out early for various reasons. One is to make sure you're a STEM person. I think there's different types of fields that I think you probably all have the intellect to do it. It's just, do you have that extra passion for it? And I think with STEM types majors, you have to have that passion for it. And, we'll see where your time and energy are. Some of you maybe have a lot more obligations in life, or maybe you have a family of your own and you're working a lot of hours. So the STEM field might be harder to attain. Again, I think it's attainable. It just may take you longer. Let's talk about that. For the UCs and Cal States, it doesn't matter how many units that you take per semester. Ideally, you're taking 12 to 15 to move through it, because the quicker you do it, the more likely you'll complete it. But sometimes life intervenes, and sometimes you're taking your STEM classes. So you could drop it down to 3 units, 6 units, whatever makes sense for that particular semester. The Cal States don't matter. They don't care at all how long it takes or what you do, just as long as you do it right. And the UCs, for the most part, don't either. Private schools might take that into account. So if you're looking to go to USC, for example, you want to take about 15 units per semester. Or if you're looking to go to like a Stanford or something like that, you definitely want to take 15 or more. But Cal States and most UCs go part-time to make sure that you get the job done early, and to realize and also you might want to be an engineer and then realize, hey, I actually like physics more, or like chemistry more, or the other way around. Maybe you're starting with chemistry and you're like, I really want to be a doctor, but actually now I want to work on prosthetics or something, whatever. So you're exploring a little bit. Most of the prereqs in the STEM fields are very similar. So there's generally not that big a shift of what you're doing. You just kind of add a couple extra courses as you go through, whether you're going to be in the biological sciences or not. So for you, time and energy, as I discussed, courses for your major are your priority. Get them done as early as possible. Internships in the field, so you get early exposure, and get yourself known. There's organizations in any field, and you can join them now. Sometimes they have student discounts where it's not as much. And you could, back when we're in person again, you can start helping out for conferences. Even if you're putting stuff in bags, you're still hanging out with other engineers and other people in the field. They're trying to get to know you, and you start to build a name there. Professional organizations are always the way to go. And again, always ask for a student discount when you look at their websites for that. You're building your brand, basically. You're building your skill set, your brand, your image. Every person that you meet is a potential job opportunity, and every person that meets you, you can do the same for them. Networking, it goes both ways. So you're not out to like use people, you're out to just share your experiences with other people, connect with them. And then, people in most fields, people stay for a while, and you get to know each other and bounce off resources and everything with each other there. So keep building that. So now we go to Cal State Los Angeles, and we had questions there. Cal State LA has something called major specific criteria. After this workshop, you're going to do a Google search. I always do, every time I say Google, my fingers do this, Google search. So if you do a Google search, eventually the chip will be implanted in our brain. Well, I have my vaccine, so it probably is already. So the devil's in me. But anyway, I could probably just like think about Cal State LA impacted majors, and it comes up. So Google search Cal State LA major specific criteria, Cal State LA. Glad I got some laughs there. Okay, perfect. There's some LOLs just for the record, and ahaha. Okay, good. That's kind of what I'm working for these days. So major specific criteria, Cal State LA specifically tells you what you need for that particular major. And sometimes it'll have 1 or 2 classes. Thank you, Shelby. It'll have like 1 or 2 classes, or it'll tell you, here's these 5 classes you need with a B or better. It's very specific, so there's no doubt about it. If you aren't able to make the major specific criteria, you have 1 or 2 choices where you're always going to apply no matter what, but you would probably want to find another major similar to what you want to do if you're able to still get into the career that you want. If there's nothing at Cal State LA that is interesting for you and you don't meet the major criteria, I would still say apply, but know that they probably will reject you, right? But when they reject you, they're not looking at your soul and measuring your heart against a feather and saying, no, they're just like, do you have the criteria? So don't take these things too personally. Here's another thing you're going to write down. Rejection is better than regret. So rejection is better than regret. You always want to apply. And if you're not admitted, so be it. Other schools will admit you if you have a strategy. There's another thing I want to tell you. Ideally, you're going to apply to quite a few campuses. It still hurts. Exactly. It still hurts. But it's better to have that day for a day of sadness than if you don't apply and your friend who's not as smart as you gets admitted. And then like, you're like, oh, I didn't apply. And like, I'm smarter than them. And they're wearing their college shirt and you're just there like, right. So you don't want a lifelong, friend, all success. And you're like at their graduation, like clapping, like, oh, so happy for you, So always apply, give yourself that opportunity. Because you never know, sometimes these things fluctuate. And again, I mentioned with COVID budgets, it might be easier, it might be harder. We just don't know. Most of these schools only admit, there's a little crying face there. So most schools only admit for fall. So sometimes you can only go in the fall, but sometimes it's spring too. So in August, we find out generally if the Cal States are open for their spring term. But all schools will be open for fall, sometimes spring, you never know. Back to Cal State LA, major specific criteria. You pull up your major, check to see what that is, and then it's basically they're telling you exactly how they're admitting you. So there's no mystery. I think the more transparent that they are, the better for you. And sometimes they'll list their minimum GPA. So if you have that, it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get admitted, but at least you hit that threshold into the next level. The strategy is to apply to 2 to 5 long shot schools that you might have a shot for, but you're like a little out of your range, but it might happen. 2 to 5, 2 to 5 moderately competitive schools that you have a pretty good shot, and then 2 to 5 schools that you have a really good shot, the sure shots basically. So in the end, you'll apply anywhere from 6 to, if you're really going to go out of the way, like maybe 12 schools, but most of you will probably apply maybe to 4 to 8 schools to be safe. And then you have the full range of where you can get admitted. Now, your next question is, well, how expensive is that going to be? Well, it could be expensive or not. So some schools have the fee waiver. So both the UCs and Cal States, there is a fee waiver. So if you're low income to a certain threshold, they could waive the fees for that. If not, I think if you have certain GPAs, it makes more sense to apply to more schools because you're on the cusp. So if you're hitting that borderline GPAs for admission, you definitely want to look around and apply to as many schools as possible so you have some place to go. I mentioned major prep earlier. Your general education classes, you don't have to complete them at Glendale. So you want to do as many as you can, but you don't have to complete them. You can complete them once you get to the university. You can balance it out, but you will have to complete them eventually. So those, you kind of pick and choose what you want to do. Again, the major prep here to, again, save money, but also screen if you have the work ethic. And I'll say if you have the work ethic to be in the STEM field, right? And that's kind of what you want to filter out while you're here. And while you're here, like I said, use our resources. You should leave Glendale College with an impeccable resume, an impeccable cover letter. Even if you don't have a specific job you're applying to right now, you can get a good base of your cover letter so you have that ready to go. And then when you get to the university, you're going to use their career center to keep working on your marketing for yourself. Pomona is the next school, and I'm going specific because those are the schools that you asked about, and I think that's important to know. So Pomona is outside of our area, so we don't have as high a priority for Pomona. And their requirements on the ASSIST website, well, actually, Cal State LA and Northridge, their requirements on the ASSIST website too, www.assist.org, and you can pull up all the classes you can take at Glendale. And if you read carefully, it'll tell you what you have to take. For most of these programs, you don't have to take all your major requirements. Highly recommended, but you don't have to do all of them. When you read that first paragraph, sometimes it'll say these are the required minimums, and sometimes it'll say the more you have, the better, because it'll ease your transition once you get over there. And you have to make that decision. Is it better to get them all done at Glendale and then go into your upper divs over there, or just to get to that environment? I think it depends on the individual. Some of you have a little bit more comfortable home environment where you're safe and all the things are being met. But some of you might just be better just to go when you have a reasonable amount of sciences done, just to have a safer environment living on campus away from maybe some family stuff, right? So it really goes into the psychological kind of decisions that you have to make. But but everything being equal, it's still, I'd say, do as much as you can before you get there. And then you just, the GEs you do over there to balance your schedule when you take your sciences. Pomona GPAs, it's hard for me to say. It's probably somewhere in the 3s. I'm hesitant now because of COVID is less predictable, but it's not necessarily like a 4.0. So don't get scared of that. Sometimes it depends on the major, could be as low as 2.5, right? So it depends on the competition that year and what it's looking like and local proximity and things like that. So you put it out there. The school that I don't think you mentioned here, but if it were me and I was in your field, I'd probably look at San Luis Obispo. So Cal State San Luis Obispo has always had great computer science engineering type majors over there. And they are highly competitive. They're definitely in the mid 3s. Probably I would say 3.6, 3.7 is a competitive GPA. Again, you always want to apply and see what happens. They're prestigious. They've been around for a long time in this kind of competitive world. They are more competitive than most UCs. So it's a Cal State, but it kind of separates itself for whatever reason into those specializations that make it well known that people want to go there. So look into San Luis Obispo. You would obviously have to move up there. It's not commutable. The schools that you can drive to, where you live in Glendale, Pomona, you could. It's just, it's ideally you'd live at Pomona, but I've had several students who commuted because it's against traffic, relatively speaking. But again, I can't stress it enough for you, particularly your types of majors, to live there. The Long Beach is the same thing. You're going to Google search impacted majors, Cal State Long Beach, and you'll see, and sometimes different types of engineering, maybe one might be impacted and one not, right? Maybe mechanical is impacted and electrical is not. So don't assume until you see each school and how their major goes, right? And so impacted major, Cal State Long Beach, look that up, fiddle around with it a little bit, see if you find anything interesting there. Scholarships. There's a website called CCC Transfer, and it's on that website. So CCC Transfer, that's intended for community college counselors, but everyone has access to it. On there, there's a link to scholarships. And so in that website, there's a box that says resources and one that says scholarships. And I think we link it through our transfer center too, because they keep it updated. There's so many scholarships out there. And what you want to do is keep a spreadsheet. And what you're going to do is, oh, perfect, Shelby. It'd be cool, just Shelby and I just go on the road and then it'd be a team here. It'd be great. Look to see what you think you might qualify for and start a calendar. Scholarships deadlines are as early as October all the way to June 1st. So you want to I have so many students come I just missed this deadline, or they come in and I'll do my best. They'll come in, that's due in an hour, and I have to do a letter of rec together or something like that. I do my best, but sometimes it's, hi, Sam seems kind of smart, give him a scholarship. There's only so much you can do, in that time. So look ahead. Ideally for your recommenders, you ideally want to give at least 3 weeks heads up of a application. But if you're down to the deadline, it doesn't hurt to ask, right? It doesn't hurt to ask your recommender, even if it is a deadline. When you are requesting a scholarship from the scholarship reference letter, ideally you'll give us you'll bullet point maybe some of your history, maybe some of the things that you did in the class. So it'll help us write the letter more effectively, what your goals are. What your goals are, what you've accomplished at Glendale. Maybe if I taught you in the class what you did, some papers and research, it helps me write a stronger letter for you. And like I said, generally most recommenders, I say 2 or 3 weeks heads up is kind of the standard. And then it's always nice to send a thank you after, maybe you get the scholarship or not, just to kind of follow up there to build that relationship moving forward. And then later on, for those of you who are looking to go to graduate school, same idea. You want to keep in touch with your recommenders, and then they'll be writing something for you in a couple of years. Depends on if you take a gap there. So scholarships are a big part of this thing too. So keep the timelines going. So we talked about IGETC and STEM IGETC. Again, that's for science majors. It's a little bit less. CSU breadth requirements at your GE, your major prep. You all like numbers and everything. So keep that spreadsheet and look at the minimum courses that you need to make sure you're minimally eligible to transfer. And then you say, all right, here's my GPA. I have a 3.4. It looks like I have a good shot at CSUN. I will take a couple extra classes specifically for CSUN, knowing that I will probably be admitted anyway. Now, the other way around is that if you have a GPA that's not as competitive and you have very little shot, does it make sense to take those 3 extra classes for that school that probably not going to admit you, right? So you have to decide, is it worth it? Because then you're taking a whole full semester of courses that don't apply to the other schools that you're looking at. Now, these are kind of decisions that you make later on as you go into the system. And then, you know, your counselor, or I can tell you kind of like what I estimate. Again, there's no guarantees in this. Actually, there is. There's something called a tag, which generally doesn't apply to all majors. So the UCs have something called a tag. It's a transfer admission guarantee. It covers all UCs except for UCLA, San Diego, and Berkeley. So the tag works for other schools, but I don't think it works for, well, there's a lot of issues with computer science and engineering. So go to each UC and see if your major is under the tag requirements. And I know a lot of schools don't offer it with the tag, but it's worth to apply because some of you might not do engineering, you might do math, or you might do physics, you might do something related, and that would be perfect, the tag. So transfer admission guarantee, the GPA is anywhere from a 3.0 to 3.4 on those guarantees, just based off that. I'm going to take a break for a second here. Not a break, I'm not going to take a nap. I'm not that old, but who has questions so far? If you can, feel free to unmute yourself and ask, because I just kind of like was a sound wall, right, the whole time right here. So what has popped in any of your minds right now since I've been talking? I hear engineers are talking a bunch, so come on, we can do this.
I'm wondering how many of the folks here, you know, already have an ed plan with a counselor, or if they haven't done it yet. So it's okay if you're not as close to transfer, and some of your questions seem like are more about what's this assist you keep mentioning. So any question, any level you're at, if you're about to transfer, if it's your first semester at GCC, feel free to ask.
I'm scrolling through, got until fall. And then if anyone is just shy with their voice, you can go ahead and just go ahead and put it in the chat there. That's okay. I'll just.
Good morning.
Oh, good. Hey, how you doing?
Good. How are you?
I don't feel so lonely anymore. Awesome.
Good. Yeah, it's nice to talk to people, right?
Yeah.
So I have a question. I'm trying to transfer in November. I'm gonna apply. So is it a good idea to like, if I haven't decided, is it Pomona, CSUN, or Long Beach? Should I apply for all of them at once?
Oh,
or
yeah,
should I apply for like one at a time, or how does that work?
Oh, good question. Yeah, you definitely want to apply to all of them at once, because you might have to wait a whole other year to do that again. So if you're close, you apply to all of them. They don't get jealous, you know, like, oh, who is he? Like, applying to them, right? No, so you apply to all of them. You might keep in mind the cost, but I would still say it's worth it. You work so hard to get to this point. You want to give yourself as many opportunities there. You apply to all of them, and then they admit you. If they all admit you, then the next level for you to see your financial aid package, and then you kind of decide. And you're looking at between, which one you said, Long Beach, where else?
Long Beach, CSUN, Pomona, and Irvine.
Okay. Perfect. Yeah.
I mean, there's maybe I might apply to USC, but I don't know how that will go.
Okay. And then later on, when we meet one-on-one or with your counselor, some of those schools you might have all the requirements and have a legitimate shot. Some of those schools, if you're missing a class, they won't admit you just based off that. And that's kind of the bigger thing I want to tell everybody. If they don't admit you, again, they're not looking into your soul, and like, you just don't have the requirements sometimes. And depends on what your plan is. So for example, say you're missing a computer science class, one computer science class, maybe Long Beach will reject you, but maybe Irvine will admit you. So it will nuance.
So if you're still missing courses, and I'm like taking the summer and spring to fill up the courses before the next semester goes, are they gonna still be able to admit you?
Yeah, so let me clarify a little bit. So if you're transferring for fall, any required course has to be done generally by the end of spring. And then if you have that, then you have a shot. Sometimes they'll let you finish that required class in the summer. Depends on the bigger situation, but you want to have it there. Now, if you're not admitted, then you could take it again and reapply the following time that they have. So yeah, there's no penalty for reapplying. You're in a new applicant pool, and then they'll reconsider you. But any major requirement, it generally needs a little gap before you start the program. Does that make sense?
Yes, but there might be a chance.
Yeah, because it would be, if you get rejected once and they figure out you're missing that one programming class, then you would take the programming class and reapply again, and you're in a whole new competition.
If you reapply again, because you're applying in the fall, they admit you the next fall.
Yeah, so you apply in the fall for fall, and if they don't admit you, then you can apply for the following spring if they're open, or the following fall after that.
Okay, so basically that major course that, it's going to take probably another semester or another year just to get to admit it.
Yeah, it could postpone you pretty significantly. So that's why we always say your major prep is your priority, and then because at least you'll be over there. Otherwise, it does postpone your admission over there. Yeah. Does that answer what you had? The question?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Okay, what's the biggest difference with fall or spring admission other than the shift in timeline? That's kind of really it. That's just the shift in timeline. Generally, fall seems more festive, I'll tell you, because most students are starting there. So there's like orientations, there's balloons. You go in spring, you're like, where's my balloon? It's just not really like kind of rated. So that's kind of just, and then also when you graduate, sometimes if you graduate 2 years later, it's exactly spring, and that's when graduations are. So it's a little off, but nothing really, it's not a major thing. You start, at least another way to look at it, you're starting a semester early. So just wherever you're admitted, whenever you go, transfer when you're ready to go, and then you adjust after that. But that's really it, just the timing in terms of the number of students. I would probably guess, this is a complete guess, probably like 90% of students start in their fall, and then maybe schools leave a little bit extra margin in the spring, maybe 10%, something like that, a smaller margin. I used to work at UCLA, and we had something called the Winter Bruins, and people get in the middle of the year, stuff like that. So we would definitely have services for them, but it wasn't as huge as the other stuff for fall. So just things like that. But outside of that, you don't lose out any curriculum. Now, science majors, sometimes you have to look out the series. Sometimes they have classes that are only offered in fall and spring. So you have to watch out for that, little things like that. You can talk to your departmental advisors at the universities, and sometimes they'll tell you, yeah, you can still transfer, but you can't start this series until the fall, for example. So little things there. Keep in mind financial aid, of course. When you apply for financial aid, here's another tip. You're going to put all the schools that you think you might transfer to. So you're going to add the Long Beach, Northridge, Irvine, wherever that's going to be. You're going to add that to your financial aid, your FAFSA. And then when you're admitted to the school, then they'll give you your financial aid award there. So there's that. GPA-wise, your fall courses. So if you're applying for fall transfer, it's usually November 30th for the UCs and Cal States. They usually hold on and wait for your fall grades. So fall is usually the last time that they'll see your GPA. And then as long as you pass your classes in winter and spring, then you're okay, right? So, but fall is your last time for the GPA for you to make an impact. So I'll talk to students like, what's your GPA? Like, well, it's a 3.0, but I'm taking 20 units in the winter and I'm gonna get all A's. I'm like, well, that's a lot for winter, but also they don't wait for winter in terms of admissions. So it's your fall grades is the last opportunity to show them what you have. Now USC and private schools are a little different. The USC is going to wait generally for your winter and spring grades when they admit you. So again, each school is a little different. Like I said, I'm kind of focusing mostly on the Cal States because that's where the questions were mostly today. But there's also other schools that have these other things. The Cal States pretty much is your grades and your GPA. The UCs like UCL, let's see here. Oh, cool. There's some more questions that come in here. When you transfer, you start off with your GCC GPA or new GPA. So it's kind of an interesting thing. So when you transfer, you're going to have a couple of different types of GPAs. They generally don't split it, but you'll have your CSUN GPA or you'll have your UC GPA, but the GCC GPA, it's still out there in the universe. So when you're applying to other things, you combine them in a way, but it's a clean slate at most schools. I think CSUN might show both on their transcript thing, but I wouldn't really worry too much about that because some grad school programs, the admission requirement is a GPA in your last 2 years. So it depends on the program. They pull out those last 2 years. or whatever the units might be, the last like 60 or 70 units, because they feel that's where your actual major is. And sometimes people stumble along when they're working on their GEs, and it's not really indicative of who they were at the end. Shelby, you're going to add to that?
Yeah, I actually just wanted to pop in and make sure we address some of the questions that came up earlier. And also just to let people know, since we do only have about 15 minutes left, this workshop also serves just for you to know how knowledgeable our transfer counselors are. And this is a group setting, right? So for some of the individual questions as well, you can follow up after this with a one-on-one drop-in with transfer or transfer appointment. But there was one, I'm not sure we got to, about, it was a FAFSA question about like a 6-year timeline. I know you're not an expert in financial aid, of course, that's the financial aid department, but in terms of a student being worried about how will it affect my FAFSA, they say, I know there are like 6 years that it is affected.
Yeah, I'll speak generally about this. The UCs have told us that they're going to accommodate any financial aid that runs out. They've been telling us that. So if you transfer to UC, they're going to work it out so you don't run out of financial aid. The Cal States, I haven't heard that promise. They might try to work with you in some way. I know that they're working on some adjustments to financial aid over the years. And 6 years, I think that's actually more of a unit kind of thing. It's not necessarily 6 actual physical years. There's some units involved. But that's about as approximate as I want to give you. Definitely want to talk to the financial aid office about those types of things, because they're very specific. And there's not only the rules now, there could be legislation around the corner that might change this. And it's hard to keep up with all those things like that. Generally, what I recommend is take it when you can get it. If you need the money, like, and if you don't get Pat of Glendale, you're just not going to get your degree anyway, right? So sometimes you need that for your food, your shelter, you need that to focus on your school. And then maybe down the road, you might take a little bit more loans, but generally for Cal States, the loans won't be crippling. They won't be really substantial. It might feel that way. I know I came from a low income family. So when I said earlier, only 30,000, like, yeah, that's a pretty shocking number to me growing up low income, but the money that you're going to make is going to rectify that pretty easily. So it's not, most of you will probably start off, I don't know, probably at the low end 50, but probably 50 to 75,000 somewhere in there in your first job. Professor Herthworth, is that about right for starting salaries? So 50 to 75, somewhere in there, depends on what they're doing. Go for it.
Yeah, typically, and you can kind of check that by looking at like Bureau of Labor Statistics and other online sources to see what entry-level salaries are for engineers and stuff.
And then, are you ready for the next question? Or
yeah, go for it.
So someone had a hypothetical, but it's related to what you're talking about with timelines and fall and spring. They said, if I have a 3.6 now for fall admission, but I'll have a 3.7, so a 0.1 difference by spring admission, do you recommend waiting till spring then?
No, you apply, and they don't keep a picture of you on the wall. Like, look at this person. No, so you apply. If you can get in, you get in. If you don't, then you keep applying. And then what happens generally, and this is what we can do one-on-one when we meet with counselors. A lot of times you'll get admitted to a couple of schools, and maybe not the one that you really wanted to. And then we have an honest conversation. Okay, you got in school to this school. Is it worth it to stay an extra semester or year to try again? And generally, my opinion is it's in most cases, it's not worth an extra year. But if you're safe at home, you have a good situation there, you can spend your time working on an internship, then maybe it might make sense. But the other way to look at it is that you lose a year of potential income. So by staying an extra year to try and get to the school that you really want to, you're losing maybe $70,000 of possible income, depends on what your thing is. So there's a lot of things that go into factoring into that situation. Because sometimes you have that dream school and you already got the tattoo on your neck that says, CSUN or UCLA or whatever. And you're like, oh my God, I'm living this whole thing. I got to go there. But we got to be strategic about these decisions and how it affects you and your family. Some of you are supporting your family. Some of you have family supporting you. So it's all over the place. Without a fee waiver, Yeah, maybe Shelby help me with these questions, I think.
Yeah, I only see the one above that in this one. So if I missed yours, anyone else, please put it again. But the one above, I don't think we've talked about yet, which is about balancing work and school. And you talked about how if people have more responsibilities, sometimes it's a different timeline. So this person says they can't imagine themselves with rent working less than 25 hours a week just to afford it. What would you recommend in terms of that balancing work and school and transfer timeline piece as well?
Well, the balancing work in school, a lot of times it's just everyone around you should hopefully respect your time. That's part of it. And setting boundaries, learning to set boundaries with friends and family. That's a big thing. And also depends on how big your family is and obligations are. Boundaries are the big thing. Then you have to figure out what that balance is. And here's a very strategic, specific, I'd like to say more on one-on-one. Your GPA is important, but sometimes you're just going to go ahead and have a lower GPA just to move through. Like, I mean, maybe you never heard this before, but sometimes strategically, if you know 2.0 will admit you, and you have a 3.0, and you're struggling, you're going to drop your classes so you get some more C's. I'm like, well, sometimes maybe just get those classes and transfer, because maybe that 2.8 is better than waiting a whole other year because your other stuff. So there's kind of like decisions you're going to have to make, because you can't, it's really hard. Well, it's really hard. I was gonna say you can't have it all, but then like 3 years later, you're gonna come back and give a speech and say that counselor said I can't have it all. Look at me now. So, but maybe I'll be that fire. But I don't know if you have a family with kids or whatever, but it's just kind of communication with the family, being clear, intentional, time management, and doing the best you can there. Sometimes there's people who can mentor you to check in with you. Maybe there's a professor or a counselor that kind of holds you accountable, things like that, whatever it might be. But we can meet one-on-one for like strategies there. There's a question about the fee waiver. I forget how much the fees are this year. It's around $70 roughly, I think. I'm approximating. So then apply to 5 Cal States and 5 UCs. So I just got to double check the fees for this year. The UCs and Cal States are in that area, like $65 to $75 each. Again, if you qualify, 4 free for the UCs, 4 for the Cal States, and then you just have to pay for the rest. And then, well, maybe if you have a birthday, you can say like in lieu of a birthday present, here's an application. Sometimes you can get creative with these things, honestly. So everyone should know you're in education. If you have a deficit right now in terms of cost, maybe channel that towards that, right? It's a good investment for you. Did I miss anything else there? So the balancing.
Professor Herbert, do you want to say that out loud too, just for the recording, what you just put in the chat?
Yeah, so it's kind of a little complicated rule, but in Engineering 100, the author of the book we use, Raymond Landis, shows a thing called the 60-hour rule, where it makes the assumption that maybe as a student, you have about 60 hours of useful time in every week. And if you have to work a certain number of hours each week, you would subtract that from the 60 hours. So for example, if you had to work 25 hours, as Christina mentioned, you would subtract that from the 60 and get 35 hours. But then since each class you take for each unit, you usually have to study for 2 hours for each hour in the classroom. You would divide that by 3 and it gives you an estimate of the number of units that is suggested that you take each semester. So in that example, it's 35 divided by 3, which is 11.67. So you might maybe take 11 or 12 units per semester if you have to work 25 hours a week. And again, you can adjust that up or down depending on the kind of classes you're taking, how disciplined you are, whether you can study a little bit at work, and so forth. But again, it's a rough guideline to give you a sense. And the reason why I say it is because I meet many students who work more than 40 hours a week and are very anxious to complete their degree, and they wind up taking 15, 18 units. And it always kind of ends in disaster because they have to drop a couple of classes and then they don't do that well in the ones that are left. So conversely, in trying to do too much, you wind up doing less than you would have if you just kind of took 2 or 3 classes to start with. So it's kind of tough. It means that it's going to take longer, but for engineering, it's really worth it. The benefits at the end of it, the higher salary and everything, is worth a little extra time. So that's kind of a struggle that many students have. So.
And
So
yeah, go ahead, Shelby.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say real quick, if we missed your question, please post it again. It's not personal. There was a lot scrolling through. So thank you for these great questions. I think we've answered most, but we still have a couple minutes. Okay, back to you, Dr. Meza.
Now it's pressure. I got a couple minutes to change your lives, right? What profound insight do I have for all of them? one of the things that I always say is talent rises. So if you're talented and put the work effort into these things, there are always going to be opportunities for you in your field. So you always want to go with that mindset. Always do the extra things, have it become part of you, particularly for this types of a major. There's so many different types of workshops throughout the year, conferences. I think particularly for your field, you definitely need that because you need the encouragement. It's a challenging field. A lot of it's you're working on your own, and that the conferences reinvigorate you because you're going through the grind. You're working, maybe 30 hours, 40 hours a week, and you're just like, and you need some bits of inspiration there. And I think that's, and guidance of role models, people who've gone through it themselves, you can kind of learn from their accomplishments and mistakes, right? So, and I'm trying to think any last transfer tidbits. UCLA and Berkeley will look at your other stuff that you do to a certain extent, but pretty much it is a GPA. UCLA, for most of their engineering, computer science, you generally need at least a 3.6. It says 3.3 or 3.4, but really it's about probably 3.6 and above. I don't think anybody mentioned LA, but I was kind of putting it in because there's some people who have in the past. So I would say 3.6 and above, you never know. 3.7 and above is probably better. But UCLA says they're starting to look at other things besides the grades the past couple of years, and then Berkeley will look at a little bit more. But most of these programs, they need to make sure that you can handle the academics, and so they don't really account as much for other things. Where if you had a different major, they would account more that you're a single parent or you have other stuff going on, because when you graduate, you're going to do more societal good in terms of social interactions. For engineering or anything computer science, you have to be able to do the math and you have to do it well, right? So that's kind of distinguishing thing, I think, between the STEM, or most of the STEM fields, as opposed to political science or even like art history, things like that. It's more flexibility in the admissions in terms of something called comprehensive review. So keep that in mind when people talk about comprehensive review. It'll affect you a little bit if you're applying to UCLA and Berkeley, but the Cal States and most of the private schools do have it. USC has a different deadline, so keep that in mind. Private schools, different deadlines. No one asks for out of state, but there's a lot of other schools out there with different deadlines to keep in mind. FAFSA, of course, you know that. If you're applying to some private schools, there's something called the CSS profile. CSS profile, that's for USC or Loyola Marymount, some other private schools there. We do have a college fair coming up in October. Oh, our Transfer Center website has a lot of great information. It's really well designed. I can say that because I didn't do it, so we have our transfer coordinator, she put it together, and it's very, there's a lot of good stuff there. We have workshops for the CSUs, for the UCs, we have personal insight questions for those of you applying, lots of things there. You will be writing the personal insight questions for the UCs. I know some Irvines there, Irvine interests, and better to get them done early and out of the way. I always make the joke where if I see it now, I can say, oh yeah, we got to work on this, whatever, bring it back, it sucks, get out of here, come back. Now, if you show it to me the day before, I'm like, it's fine. It's fine. Like I could be more critical now. I can work with you. We can get it better. And because we have like 2 months to work on it, and the closer we get to it, there's not much you can do. So, and again, it's not just for admissions for most of you, for the UCs, your essays are not necessarily about your admissions, but it's about scholarships, because it's an admissions and scholarship deadline for the UCs. So I think that's kind of, I'm wrapping up. I mean, there's so much stuff I can tell you, probably like 3 more hours of it, but you'll be asleep. And I still want you to visit us, right, in the counseling offices and the Transfer Center for your specific questions. I want to thank you both for allowing me to present to everybody in the group. I hope this helped.
This is very helpful, and I've seen lots of positive feedback throughout. I saw a quick question about, you were talking about conferences and events and being involved in the field. Someone asked, with the pandemic situation, are things limited? And I can answer that because, we've been trying to do stuff with AIMS and we've seen conferences. A lot of places are more resilient than you'd think in terms of still offering virtual options. And for those of you doing a resume for transfer or for scholarships or for internships, being at this event means you're an AIMS student. You know, you're participating in the AIMS program. You're already doing things. So put that on your resume, include that in addition to any conferences and extra stuff you go to. But showing up today means that you're going outside of your way, outside of class, to learn more and be a better student. So get credit for that. And you can meet with me or one of the career counselors in the Career Center to talk about how to put experiences from school on a resume. And then someone else asked real quick, for those going into the continued education. So I think, Matheus, let me know if that means like you already have a bachelor's and you mean like you're coming back. I might be making an assumption there, but basically, does having work experience help with getting into a school?
It would only help for those schools that look at additional things. So that would be UCLA and Berkeley, maybe Irvine, but most of the Cal States, it doesn't. I mean, obviously it's great that you have that. It's great for the workforce, but in the admission process, it's usually not counted. It's just basically the grades and the courses. There's various reasons for that. I think the resources for them to evaluate applicants at that level, it's kind of challenging. So, but the professional work experience will give you an advantage once you graduate, because you'll definitely be more polished probably than your peers. No offense, peers, but you know, he'll have like more background in it, right? But in the admissions process, it wouldn't really work on that aspect of it.
All right, fantastic. Y'all have asked excellent questions, been super engaged, and this is not the end of this transfer conversation. So that website, the Transfer Center website, I find new gems on there every day. They have university representatives come in and visit in person during the before times, and they also have opportunities to connect with admissions counselors now virtually, as well as workshops on TAG, which Kevin briefly mentioned. And so there's lots more information for you to gather depending on your situation. But I'm so happy you were here with us today. Dr. Meza, are you, if they have questions after this, should they just email me or just go to the Transfer Center like Cranium Cafe page? What's the best way to follow up if they have questions?
Okay, yeah, make an appointment with me at the Transfer Center. I take student appointments on Tuesday mornings and Wednesdays. And then, yeah, the sooner you do it, the better. If you're having trouble making that appointment, just email me. And then, so it's KMEZA at Glendale, I almost said Gmail, but KMEZA, I'll write it here. And then that's only if you have trouble getting an appointment, because sometimes I get booked, and then I can work around it since you're in this program. We could do it that way. So try the appointment and we'll meet one-on-one. And if not, email me and we'll figure something out.
Perfect. And then I know we're at our last minute here. I also put our next event. You've heard from a counselor now. If you want to hear from real students who went through the transfer process, that was a request last spring when we surveyed our AIM students. They wanted to hear more about the transfer process. So we have GCC alum in engineering coming October 7th virtually to talk with you about their transfer experience. I believe one went to Pomona, one went to CSUN, one is in grad school right now and can talk about grad school options in engineering. I know some of you aren't in engineering, so I apologize that this one's pretty specific, but you're still welcome to join us. And without any further ado, I will thank you all for being here. Thank Dr. Meza and Professor Herworth for their time. And I hope all of you have a wonderful rest of your academic year. And we hope to see you at the next AIMS event. All right. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.